Game of Thrones Season 8 obviously did not end how a lot of fans wanted it to, but did they get some of the plots right with any of the characters? Is this how George R.R. Martin will write the ending? Will Bran be king in the books? I think there's a couple points that we need to emphasize to answer those questions. That's theme and character. But we need to look at the approach to storytelling by our author George R.R. Martin to do that. While George utilizes his Gardner approach with his characters and grows the story from there, you can't deny the various themes that he then connects to all of his characters and the world they live in. These details become the pathway for the story to drive toward its plots and ending. Where on the other end, we have showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss who demonstrate a different philosophy on themes. Here, we're going to cite Andy Greenwald from Grantland. And Greenwald stated the following: "When I asked Benioff and Weiss if it was possible to infer any overall intentionality to the upcoming 10 episodes, they sneered. Themes are for 8th grade book reports," Benioff told me. And the evidence of David Benioff and D.B. Weiss's neglect of themes is clear as Game of Thrones heads towards its conclusion, and because of this, it very much changes the context for so much of the story compared to that in the books. And let's go ahead and compare that to how George R.R. Martin views things. "I've always agreed with William Faulkner. He said that the human heart in conflict with itself is the only thing worth writing about. I've always taken that as my guiding principle, and the rest is just set dressing." That's George's take on character, and he works out his plots often from there. But our author introduces more nuance than that because when he actually zooms out of the individual and examines society as a whole, this is where he introduces grander themes that become more universal. Romanticism, the patriarchy, violence and death, feminism, and overall moral ambiguity. These ideas can be vague, but as you continue to read George R.R. Martin's writings, you can see that he is narrowing these themes down to a statement. A message. The author doesn't just want to tell you a story, he's offering to you a lesson that can be learned from that story. It's a true conclusion not of the story, but a conclusion from the story. And you can disagree with the lesson, and that's the point. The conversation isn't about whether you agree with the ending, it is about whether or not you can agree with the meaning behind the ending. So when we frame things in this lens, can we then say, yes, Bran would become king? Well, narratively, I think if George arrives at that point, it will certainly not be because Tyrion believes Bran has the best story. I do believe that Bran is being positioned to assume a significant role in the power struggle for the Seven Kingdoms. But will Bran become king? Well, if he does, it won't come out of left field as it does in the show. That's for sure. But hang on, we also need to keep in mind that there's various plots that are not included in Game of Thrones that will absolutely disrupt the ending that we got in the show. There's no Lady Stoneheart in the show, the Ironborn plot's missing, the Dornish plot is missing, and a significant character that was omitted is young Griff, aka Aegon Targaryen, the supposed child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, who survived all these years due to a baby swap by Varys before the sack of King's Landing during Robert's Rebellion. And then there's a whole background behind there about whether or not he actually might be a part of the Blackfyre faction of the Targaryens. Then there's also the northern plot at the Wall, the Boltons, Stannis, Mance Rayder, who was not killed in the books. Plus you have the others, aka White Walkers, who are presented much differently, or should I say, less clearly in the books. And none of this truly gets in the way of Bran becoming king. Look, the story pushes our characters forward in Game of Thrones. The plots dictate to the characters and what they will do. While in the books, the story is pushed forward by those characters. And for George, he's going to keep this path until he finds the characters organically arriving at the end of the plot that matches his theme. This is probably why his books have expanded from the initial 3 to now at least 7. Now, for George, the plot and theme, they are synonymous. But what even is the plot of A Song of Ice and Fire? The High Lords fight for power, and regardless of who wins, the true threat beyond the wall is being ignored. And by the time anyone acknowledges the others as a true threat, devastation will already be inevitable. Just like George reflects real-world history in his writing, he is also reflecting climate change in the form of the others. The others are symbolic of climate change, the true threat beyond the wall. Okay, will Bran become king? Well, hold on again, because that's not the point of the story George is telling. It was never the point. What George would want and what would actually happen would probably be just like this.
Maybe the decision about what's best for everyone should be left to, well, everyone.
That's right. George wants democracy. What is best for the most amount of people will be decided by those people. A whole book series that is essentially criticizing the absolute monarchy, but somehow doesn't end in the disposal of that system entirely. Ultimately, it ends up becoming an elective monarchy. And some may argue that the United States have something similar. And if you're the author, George R.R. Martin, and you've got a much more of a nihilistic outlook on a constitutional federal republic, you could interpret that this would be a rather bleak ending for the story. Now, this very well may be how George ends the books, as it would be consistent with his writing that represents the harsh reality, but may also lend to a silver lining that perhaps things could be better under this system, but the pathway for corruption is still there. That's why we only have a dream for spring, and it's not just simply titled Spring. It's a great big maybe. And while this elective monarchy may truly come to fruition, Bran is a teenager who is essentially the most powerful, all-knowing being in existence. The possibility of this election in the future may very well have some obstacles, because as Peter Baelish would say,
A lot can happen between now and never.
if there's one thing that I'd want you to take away from this video, it's not that D&D botched the ending point of the story. It's that they ended their characters, the world, and the message without the meaning, without greater commentary. The show may or may not have gotten the right ending, but that's not the point, because the point was the theme. The theme isn't there to serve the ending is there to serve the theme. So did they get it right? Is Bran king? Probably. And I'd also say, it doesn't matter.